There is a plant growing behind my barn right now that has been growing behind every barn my family has ever owned. My grandfather grew it, his father grew it, and his father before him, all the way back to a time none of us remember clearly, when our people first broke the soil in this part of Pennsylvania and decided they would never leave. I'm going to tell you about that plant, but first I need to tell you something else, something that happened 4 winters ago, when my neighbor's wife, a woman named Ruth, came to our door after dark. She had not come to our door after dark in 30 years, and when my wife opened it, Ruth was holding her hands against her own chest, like she was trying to keep something inside from escaping. She was gray in the face. She could not draw a full breath, and she said one sentence that I will never forget. She said, "Eli, I need the tea." I knew exactly what she meant. My wife knew, and within 10 minutes the kettle was on, and we were pulling dried leaves from a jar that sits on the same shelf it has sat on since the day I built that shelf with my own father, 51 years ago. What was in that jar, what went into that tea, is the thing I want to share with you today. But I need you to understand something first. This is not about one plant. This is about a way of thinking that has kept my people healthy for 300 years, without a single pharmacy, without a single pill bottle with a child-proof cap, without a single waiting room, where you sit under lights that hum and read your name off a clipboard. We did not reject those things out of spite. We simply never needed them. And the reason we never needed them starts in the dirt behind my barn, with a plant most people alive today have never even heard of. The herb is called elecampane. Say it slowly. Elecampane. It sounds old because it is old. It has been used since before this country had a name. The Romans knew it. The monks in Europe grew it in their healing gardens, the ones behind stone walls where silence was the rule and the soil was turned by hand. When our ancestors came across the Atlantic, when they packed what little they could carry into wooden trunks and left behind everything they knew, they brought seeds, vegetable seeds, grain seeds, and tucked in among them, wrapped in cloth, seeds for the plants they could not live without. Elecampane was among them. My grandfather called it by a different name. He called it horseheel. Some of the older families near us still use that word. He told me once, when I was maybe 9 or 10, that it was called horseheel because the old farmers in Europe used it on their horses first, on animals with thick chests and heavy lungs that worked in cold barns through long winters. They would boil the root and mix it into the feed, and the horses would breathe easier. Their coughs would quiet, their stamina would return, and then someone, some farmer's wife centuries ago, had the good sense to wonder whether what healed the horse might also heal the man. And she was right. Let me describe this plant to you, so you could recognize it if you walked past it. Elecampane grows tall, sometimes to the height of your chest, if the soil is rich and the summer has been wet. The leaves are broad and rough on top, soft and almost furry underneath, like the ear of a young calf. In midsummer, it sends up thick stalks, and at the top of each stalk blooms a flower that looks like a ragged sunflower. Bright yellow, but not tidy, not perfect. It looks like it has been through something. And maybe that is why I have always liked it. It is not a flower that tries to be beautiful. It simply is what it is, and what it is happens to be one of the most useful things the good Lord ever pushed out of the ground. But the power is not in the flower. The power is in the root. When you dig up elecampane root in the autumn, and it must be autumn after the 2nd year of growth, never the first, you will find something that surprises you. The root is thick, fleshy, pale on the inside, and when you cut it open, it smells like nothing else in your garden. There is a sharpness to it, almost like camphor, but underneath that, something warmer, something that reminds you of old wood, of a barn in winter, of something your body recognizes, even if your mind does not. That smell is the medicine. My grandmother, my father's mother, a woman who stood barely 5 feet tall and never raised her voice in 60 years of marriage. She was the one who taught me how to prepare the root. Not my grandfather, not my father, her. She said the root was women's knowledge first, and men were only allowed to learn it if they paid attention and kept quiet. So I paid attention, and I kept quiet. She would dig the root in October, always after the first frost, but before the ground went hard. She said the cold drove the strength downward, pushed it into the root, where it would concentrate and wait. She would wash the roots with well water, never warm, and slice them thin on a board she used for nothing else. Then she would spread those slices on a wooden rack near the stove, not on the stove, never in direct heat, and let them dry slowly over 3 or 4 days, turning them once each morning. When they were dry enough to snap clean between your fingers, she would crush them lightly and store them in a dark glass jar with a tight lid. That jar was her medicine chest. That single jar held what she considered the most important remedy our family possessed. Do you know what she used it for? Everything that lived in the chest. Every cough that would not leave. Every tightness in the ribs after a long cold. Every winter illness that settled deep and refused to move. She would make a tea, a strong one, darker than you would expect, almost the color of weak coffee, and she would sit with whoever was sick and make sure they drank it slowly, all of it, twice a day, and within 3 days, sometimes 2, the cough would break, the chest would open, the breath would return. I watched her do this more times than I can count, for my father, for my uncles, for me, when I was 7 years old and a cold had settled into my lungs so deep that I could hear myself rattle when I lay down at night. I remember the taste of that tea. It was bitter, it was warm, and it worked. Now I am not a doctor. I have never been to a doctor's office for myself, not once in my 73 years, and I do not stand here telling you to do what I do. I stand here telling you what I have seen, what I have lived, what has worked for my family across more generations than most families can even name. There is a difference between giving advice and giving testimony. This is testimony. What lives inside elecampane root, what makes it work, is something the old herbalists in our community have always understood, even without having a laboratory word for it. The root fights what does not belong in the body. It loosens what has become stuck. It warms what has grown cold. If you think about what happens when a person gets sick in the chest, the heaviness, the thickness, the feeling of something sitting on your ribs that will not move, then you understand what this root does. It moves it. It breaks it apart. It tells the body, gently but firmly, to push it out. My father used the root in a different way than my grandmother. She made tea. He made a syrup. He would simmer the fresh root, not dried, fresh, in water for a long time, an hour or more, until the liquid was dark and reduced by half. Then he would strain it through cloth and stir in raw honey from our own hives, equal parts. He would pour that syrup into small brown bottles and line them up in the cellar, and they would last all winter. 1 spoonful in the morning, 1 at night. He gave it to us children starting in November, before we were sick, not after. He said the best time to fix a roof is before the rain, not during. That is a principle I want you to hear clearly. My people do not wait for illness. We do not sit still and hope. We prepare. We plant in spring what we will need in winter. We dry in summer what will heal us in January. The whole rhythm of our life is built around this idea, that the future is not something you worry about. It is something you work toward, 1 jar at a time, 1 root at a time, 1 season at a time. And this is where I see the greatest distance between our way and the way of the world outside. I have watched, over many years, how people in the towns near us live. I do not judge them. But I notice things. I notice that they eat food they did not grow. They take pills they do not understand. They see doctors who see them for 10 minutes and send them away with a piece of paper. They put their faith in things they cannot touch, cannot smell, cannot dig from the ground with their own hands. And when something goes wrong in their body, they are afraid, because they have no knowledge. They have outsourced their health the way they have outsourced their bread, their water, their shelter. And when the system they depend on fails, and I have seen it fail, they have nothing to fall back on, nothing on the shelf, nothing in the cellar, nothing growing quietly behind the barn, waiting to be useful. That is not freedom. I do not care what anyone calls it. That is dependence dressed in comfortable clothes. Now let me return to Ruth, the neighbor who came to our door that winter night 4 years ago. I promised you that story, and I keep my promises. Ruth had been coughing for 3 weeks. It had started as something small, the way it always does, and she had ignored it, the way people sometimes do when they are strong and stubborn and believe their body will sort itself out. But it did not sort itself out. It moved deeper. It settled. And by the night she came to our door, she could not lie down without feeling like she was drowning from the inside. My wife made the tea strong. 3 spoonfuls of dried elecampane root, crushed fine, steeped in water that had just come off the boil, covered and left to sit for 15 minutes. She strained it, added a little honey, and handed it to Ruth in a clay cup that had belonged to my wife's mother. Ruth drank it. She made a face. Everyone makes a face the first time. And she drank the rest. My wife sent her home with enough dried root for a week, told her how to make it, how much to use, how often to drink. And then she told her something my grandmother used to say, something I had nearly forgotten until I heard my wife say it out loud that night. She said, "The root does the work, but you have to be still enough to let it." 5 days later, Ruth came back. She was not grey anymore. She was not holding her chest. She brought us a loaf of bread she had baked that morning, and she said, "I breathed all night. I have not breathed all night in a month." That is not a miracle. Do not call it that. It is simply what happens when you use what the earth provides, the way it was meant to be used, in the time it was meant to be used. I want to tell you something else about elecampane that most people do not know. It is not only for the lungs. My grandmother used it for the stomach as well, for the slow, heavy feeling that comes when digestion has grown weak, when food sits inside a person like a stone. She said the root warms the belly the same way it warms the chest. She said the body is one thing, not a collection of separate parts, and what heals one corner often heals another if you are patient enough to let it travel. She also used it in a poultice. She would take the fresh root, grate it fine, mix it with a little warm lard, spread it on a piece of cloth, and lay it against the chest of someone who was very sick, someone whose cough had gone beyond what tea alone could reach. She would wrap that cloth around them and put them to bed under heavy quilts, and by morning the cloth would be stained and dark, as if it had drawn something out through the skin. I saw this with my own eyes. I was 12 years old. The person in the bed was my uncle. And by the next evening, he was sitting up, eating soup, asking about his cows. Now here is my warning. And I give this warning because I have seen what happens when people take knowledge like this and twist it into something it was never meant to be. Elecampane is powerful. That is why it works. That is. But powerful things demand respect. My grandmother never used it on a pregnant woman. She never gave it to a child under 3. She never used it for longer than 2 weeks without resting. She said the body needs to be led, not forced. And if you push too hard, even with good medicine, you teach the body to stop listening. I have also seen people in the outside world take an old remedy like this and turn it into a product. They put it in a capsule. They sell it in a bottle with a bright label. They strip it from its roots, and I mean that in both senses of the word. They take it away from the knowledge that surrounds it, the timing, the preparation, the respect, the generations of careful use. And then, when it does not work the way they expected, or when someone uses too much because more must be better, they blame the plant. They say old medicine is unreliable. They say it is primitive. But the plant did not fail. The knowledge failed. Or rather, the knowledge was never there to begin with, because no one took the time to learn it properly. That is the danger of our age. Not that the old ways are lost. They are not lost. Not yet. Not entirely. The danger is that they are taken out of context, stripped of the hands that held them, and sold back to people who no longer know what they are holding. If you want to grow El Campaign, and I hope you do, here is what I will tell you. Give it room. It spreads. Plant it where it will get morning sun and afternoon shade. Give it soil that drains well, but holds some moisture. Do not harvest the root until the second autumn. Let the plant build its strength first. And when you dig, dig gently. Take what you need. Leave the rest. The plant will come back if you treat it with respect, and it will give you medicine for years, decades even. My patch behind the barn is older than my youngest grandchild. I have dug from it every October for more than 40 years, and every spring it returns, taller than the year before, more generous than the year before, as if it is grateful to be needed. I think about that sometimes, about what it means to be part of a cycle that does not break, seed to soil, soil to root, root to jar, jar to cup, cup to breath. My grandmother's hands in the dirt, my father's hands stirring the syrup, my wife's hands handing a clay cup to a neighbor in the dark, my hands writing none of this down because it lives in my body, in my memory, in the rhythm of what I do every autumn without thinking about it. This is what I want to leave you with. Not a recipe, though I have given you one. Not a name, though now you know it. What I want to leave you with is this. The most important medicine you will ever hold is the kind you grew yourself, prepared yourself, understood yourself. It does not come from a stranger. It does not arrive in the mail. It comes from the ground beneath your feet, if you are willing to kneel down and learn what is already there, waiting for you the way it has waited for every generation before you. The earth has not forgotten how to heal. The question is whether we have forgotten how to listen. My grandmother listened, and she is the reason I am standing here today, breathing easily, with 73 winters behind me and a jar of dried root on my shelf that will carry me through the next one. Go find El Campaign, learn its ways, grow it close to where you sleep, and when winter comes, you will not be afraid. You will be ready, the way my people have always been ready, quietly, without fanfare, without a single pill bottle in sight. That is the old way, and it still works.